Okay, so hey, this is a little special thing that we're trying to do here. There was too much material, and I left some stuff on the cutting room floor, and I don't know how often we'll do this or not. This maybe could be a cool thing that we do, and we'll see how you guys interact with this or not. So feel free, by the way, to comment below and that kind of stuff. But I didn't want to leave so much out of the sermon content or skip over these chapters so much. But at the same time, I didn't want to include so much of the material that is not necessary for us as we move into Abraham's story. That we miss Abraham's story because we're focusing on other stories. So what I'm trying to do here with Devin, who's with us today, is I want to look at Genesis chapters 18 and 19 because there is so much interesting stuff here within Genesis and within these particular chapters, talking about Lot and how Abraham's praying with God and how God visits him. We have another appearance going on with the three visitors. So all of this stuff is going on. We got the Sodom and Gomorrah thing. And so I thought instead of just ignoring that or hand waving that away, because we have been doing kind of like a chapter at a time, I figured it would be beneficial to pause for a moment, maybe post an additional video, and we'll see how you guys like this or interact with it. I don't really know what our format is. We're just kind of relaxed here and chilled out, but anyway, we're gonna have a conversation. This is kind of what somewhat of the writing process looks like. I send stuff to whether it's Devin or Seth or Miguel or someone else who might show up and want to speak at some point. This is kind of what it looks like. We send cuts back and forth to one another, add some notes, ask some questions, talk about the text, and so you're getting kind of a little bit of an insight here about what the writing process looks like around here. So with that all said, let's just go right into the text and start looking at Genesis 18 and 19, and maybe we'll start with a little summary, and you can interject here and there if as you need, throw out questions, whatever, and we'll just get rocking and rolling. 18 and 19 come directly after chapter 17, and you were commenting before we went on camera here. We talked a lot about circumcision last week. Talked a lot about the sign of circumcision and how important it is, though, for distinguishing God's covenant people versus those who are not. And wouldn't you know it, here we have now a story where the circumcision now goes along with what's happening with God appearing to Abraham. And he comes and says to Abraham, well, he comes with two other visitors, which is already interesting. Maybe Devin, why don't you read some of that?
So chapter 18.
Yeah.
Then the Lord appeared to him by the I scribbled it out. How do you even say that?
For the terebinth?
Terebinth
I
trees
just have
of
great
Mamre.
trees.
Oh, well, mine says terebinth. That's the New King James for it. The great trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground. Said, my Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread, and you may refresh your hearts. After that, you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, do as you have said.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. Clearly, there's like garden language here.
Yeah.
Clearly we've got God appearing to his 2 appointed, Abraham and Sarah, and here they are hanging out at a tree.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of having the temptation or whatever, that kind of thing, you've got just an instance where God is appearing to his people at a tree, which again, I just think that there's some Genesis language being left on here. And I don't know how interesting that tidbit necessarily is. I just think that the authors are doing some of these things on purpose.
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking that too, that I don't know if it's significant or a stretch or anything, but versus, Adam and Eve walking with God in the cool of the day, and, united with God. Right now, Abraham's been given a promise, but he's not fully occupying this land that's been promised to him. And when he's under this tree, it says in the heat of the day.
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, oh, there's kind of a...
Yeah.
Whatever that's called, a reverse parallelism or whatever.
I don't know what the technical words are, but like a reverse picture, which is, that's really interesting because all I was thinking about was the garden language, but you're even adding more detail about the heat versus the cool. And what's so fascinating though is that they come now, instead of this being an opportunity for Abraham to merely serve. It seems like God is actually intending to do something here. Like they're passing by on purpose.
Yeah.
It's not God being coy. I don't mean it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
yeah.
it's like God's passing by with these two. I think we later learn that they're angels.
And I think with the expectation of being met with hospitality.
Yes. Which Abraham, of course, picks up on.
Yeah.
So maybe he passes the first test here at a tree is by even bringing them in. But I keep wanting to hit this point that the Lord appears in physical form. And I just think that there's something really important going on here. I know I keep forecasting out to like Hebrews and the New Testament and stuff like that.
John's going to make some very specific claims about, who is it that Isaiah sees and all that.
And who is it that, before Abraham was, I am, right? And then later on in Hebrews, you've got mention of Moses and all this. So I know that we're going to get there at some point, but I don't know how people take moments like this or how they envision this happening. And maybe this is one of the instances where they would be really like honed in, because obviously there's God and two other visitors.
Yeah.
And they eat together and they sit down. But I don't know if people have noticed the other times. I mean, I don't even know how many times it's happened so far.
Yeah, I haven't been keeping count, but it also it's one of those things that once it's on your radar, then you're a little more aware of it. So like this instance, I would be more familiar with like, hey, I'm envisioning 3 men arriving at this tree or whatever, versus, other times when it says that he appears before them. Like, I always envisioned a, disembodied voice that met Hagar or whatever, which now kind of paints it differently for me,
And I think that does happen actually in our text that we're going to be looking at in chapter 21, where it just seems like there is a voice from heaven. But we have 2 accounts of that happening with Hagar. And the first account is where the angel of the Lord appears, which again, there's some mystery and debate about this, but like I've been saying, I think this is the same thing going on here, at least a theophany, if not what I would say a Christophany. More specifically, it's Christ, a pre-incarnate Christ moment showing up. I just think there's something really interesting going on all the way across our Bibles, and we're not primed to see the spiritual things that are happening because we have I don't know if it's Veggie Tales. I don't know if it's the Bible stories we grew up on watching, maybe, where we don't have we're not primed to think of God showing up in physical form. That happened in the Bible with Jesus or something like that only, or it happened one other time when Moses was put in the cleft of the rock or whatever. But it seems like it's an ongoing occurrence, and that God's actually a lot more acquainted with his people, and actually they're a lot more acquainted with him than maybe we first see at first blush. I don't know. I just think that there's something really interesting to all that.
Yeah, it would be interesting to try to get a count on how many times it more explicitly says he appeared, and if the language really does lean into a physical appearance.
Yes.
Because I feel like I've heard before that it's like 5 or something like that throughout the Old Testament, but yeah, it'd be good to get.
We might have had 5 already in just these first few chapters, but anyway, we could go back and look at that. Now, so the 3 visitors they come to Abraham, and they are on their way, if I remember correct, to wherever they're heading, but Abraham is stopping them, and then we get this reiteration again of the promise after he offers this hospitality. So he offers hospitality, then they're seen there eating, they're hanging out, and then God in verse 9 says, "Where is your wife Sarah?" They asked him. "There in the tent," he said. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." Now we're primed to start seeing, we're already primed to know that this was the Lord because the text didn't tell us, but if it didn't, we would already now be thinking, oh, this is the same thing we heard from Genesis 17, when the Lord already appeared to Abraham and renamed him Abraham even. But here we are with the Lord now reiterating this promise. We've got another moment of this reiteration of promise and covenant that's going on. But then Sarah laughs. And now I wonder about this, and maybe we could talk this out a little bit. But Abraham laughed too.
Yeah.
So why is this different?
Well, I was trying to remember if does it say anything about him relaying this to Sarah when we were in chapter 17, or is this just Abraham hears it and laughs for maybe the same reason Sarah does? But the other thing that I thought was interesting was that, when we last heard off, then Abraham was almost petitioning for, well, can't the promise come through Ishmael? And God says, well, I've heard you, and I will bless him as well, but he's not deviating from his promise. And so now, that was kind of a reminder of the initial promise that was given to Abraham through Abraham and his wife Sarai. And now he's getting, when he does show up, he's like, hey, by this time next year, it's not just hey, this is going to happen, 10 years passes and then Ishmael's born. Hey, this is still going to happen, and then another 13 lapses. Now they're given a definite time. So it's a...
by next year.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's come down to a definite timeline promise. And, it could be that Abraham's response is, maybe he laughs because he's like, well, I have a son. We could make it... Can it just work through him? Maybe Sarah's laughing because, hey, what are we at, 23 years now that she's been waiting on this promise?
And this is unbelievable.
Right.
So... Yeah, so I wonder, is his laugh a laugh of... I don't know what's the right word. I don't know what's the right word. Hers, clearly, though, it seems to be a laugh of unbelief.
Yeah.
She's mocking at the idea. Whereas his laugh is more like, okay, but... don't I already have... Because he then immediately, like you said, leads them to Ishmael, which is, it's verses 17 and 18 in chapter 17. He fell face down, he laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Yeah, it just... Why is it that Abraham gets to skirt by... but Sarah kind of gets jammed up here in this moment. Because then he goes on, verse 10 still. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, I wonder if that's the issue. It's because she carries on. Because Abraham doesn't try to pass off, that this is a hard thing to believe. Yet he still does. Whereas she's passing it off oh, no, I don't know. No, I'm with you. I agreed the whole time. I don't know.
Maybe she's laughing because Abraham's old.
It's such an interesting, and this is what I keep coming back to too. Is this is why I think in the Deuteronomy 32, this portioning of the nations out. What we I can't remember what sermon it's been now. If it was the third or the fourth one, I don't know. There's just too much information swirling around. But this is what I keep pointing back to, this idea of seed and line and heritage and descendants. There's something really important that God's trying to do here, and it really keeps punctuating that it has been 13. Well, not just 13 years, it's been 23 years that they haven't had a child yet since the initial promise. It's like proof on proof on proof that they are not able to. And so, of course, she laughs, but then anyway, she doesn't just maintain the joy of that moment. It becomes, I don't know, it seems like it's a mock, or maybe it's not a mock. Maybe it's just because she doesn't want to be jammed up by God, or she doesn't want to be called out, which might indicate something about Sarah's nature, just her character, maybe not nature, but character in general, because she gets, and we'll look at it this coming Sunday, when we look at chapter 21, when Isaac is born. She gets angry because Ishmael's joking around.
Yeah, which is I don't want to throw a bunch of shade on Sarah, but it's she does not have a great record for being fun to be around. I don't know.
She can't seem to just relax or something. I don't know. I don't want to speculate too far or make it seem like she's any worse than anyone else is in this story, because Abraham certainly is.
Well, you pointed out the honor shame culture,
Yeah.
and the what you would carry with you if you were unable to
Right.
have a child. We talked about that maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago, and I'm sure that plays a
It has
ton
to.
into her
Yeah.
demeanor and conduct, towards Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael, and all
Well,
that.
and the promise hasn't been realized yet. So,
Yeah.
You know.
So rather than painting her just as a, hey, this lady's tough to be around, it's probably more fair to say like, hey, this story is centralized around this son of promise who hasn't come, and she's almost watching blessing go out to Abraham, Hagar, Ishmael, and time is stacking up on it too,
Right.
and she's been in the wrong, and is seeing the fruit of her wrong decisions as well, So I just think it's stacking up on her too, to give her a little bit more grace. But
why did Sarah laugh and say? Because he doesn't ask that of Abraham, but I wonder if this is a part of Sarah's formation. This is a point I've been trying to draw out, is God deals with each individual in a way that they need in order for their formation. Paul later on in the New Testament talks about work out your own faith with fear and trembling. And so I wonder if God here is doing something specific for her. He's calling her out specifically.
Well, maybe it's also where she's at, It says that she's in the tent behind him or whatever. If he's talking to Abraham and Abraham's like, ha! And he's like, well, this is how it's going to go. And if I hear someone kind of behind a curtain laughing, what are you laughing at? Maybe that's it. I don't know.
It could be.
Sorry, what was that?
It could be. So. It's so interesting though that she lies and says, I did not laugh. And he's like, well, but yeah, you did. And then the account's done. And then we're done with that moment. It's so I wonder if the narrative is just trying to give us these little hints of hey, these people they're not blessed because of their own righteousness or something like that. They're blessed because God does it, not because they deserve it or because they displayed themselves in such a way. Not that they haven't done some demonstrations. Abraham believed and was credited as righteous, those kinds of things. But I wonder if these twin accounts of the things they do right and the things they do wrong, if they are allowed to exist together with one another, because we're not supposed to venerate, or I don't know if that's the right word, but worship Abraham and Sarah.
Right.
We're supposed to see God in the midst of all this and how he's operating to work towards his plan, again working through this line, this legacy, his progeny, to have Isaac now be the one through whom the snake crusher will come.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe the point of it too, is to if we were keeping tallies on when they do it right, when they do it wrong, if we were looking to bolster our faith on Abraham's good conduct, we'd have something very flimsy. But if we're looking at God's faithfulness through it, then we're rock solid.
And again, that's why God is the one that goes through, the smoking pot and flaming torch. Why he's the one that goes through and doesn't. Yeah, that doesn't even seem to allow. It's not even an opportunity for Abraham to go through. Abraham's in a dark sleep somewhere else. Well, this is all happening in the dark sleep, but he is set to the side, witnessing this rather than participating in the way that God is. Yeah.
Which is a good snapshot for the Old Testament as a whole.
Right.
It isn't curating the story and the main figures in a way that paints them in a very positive light.
Correct. And they could.
They could have.
And
they don't. It's a long list of rebellions against God and shortcomings of people, but it loops around to God's faithfulness. Which I think is on purpose and unique.
And it's why we keep saying, Bible's not about you. That's a shorthand way of kind of encapsulating everything that you've just said, that the Bible is not shying away from the reality of human sin and even the founders sin, which is again a reminder that this book is not about them even. It's about what God is doing through them.
Yeah. Which, not to jump too far ahead, but once we get into the New Testament stuff, what are the Pharisees arguing with Jesus about? What is their main claim for their righteous standing? Well, we're sons of Abraham. We're like, well, did you read his story? And of course, Jesus argues it correctly, and Paul and all them. But yeah.
Was that John 8?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
Don't do that. To
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
Not in front of the
Don't
camera.
test me either. Don't test me either because I wouldn't know. Off the top of my head. Yeah. Okay. So this is the beginning of 18. Then we have this interesting thing that happens where the scene changes. When the men got up to leave, they looked down in verse 16. They looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him, for I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know." Okay, then the men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, "Will you sweep away?" So, okay, even another scene change. Top of the hill, three together, well, four together, and then the two take off. Now, what's interesting, he says, "I'm going to go and look through all the stuff," and yet it's the angels.
Yeah.
We find out in the beginning of chapter 19 that it's the angels that go with, or are the ones that go. And that God actually sits back, or the Lord sits back with Abraham while they talk back and forth. And I just thought that's interesting.
Yeah, I always thought it was interesting too that when he says, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing?"
Yeah.
Who's he saying that to?
Yeah.
He's like, the two have gone down. Is Abraham there? Is he just kind of saying it?
No, well, the way I read this, and maybe you can correct me here, but the way that I read it is that they're all up there, all four of them. And that before they head off, that's what he's like.
Okay, to send them on the way.
Yes,
okay, I'm with you.
He's like telling them, he's asking them. Which again, these are just angels. Which makes me wonder, like, or it not makes me wonder so much as it proves the point that I keep drawing out, which is that God wants to work with his imagers. Like when he says, "I'm going to go do this," what he means is that I'm sending my representatives who are part. It's not that he couldn't know that or doesn't already know it.
Yeah.
But he's utilizing them because they're not just computer programs or simulations in his mind who sit around. These are actual beings who can participate with him in what he's wanting to see happen. And so he's letting them go and see the report and bring it back or whatever. And I always found that interesting that this is one of the reasons God creates. In fact, it's because he desires to partner with both the human and the spiritual imagers, and we're getting a picture of that. We've got the tree, we've got them hanging out. Yeah, it's not the cool of the day, it's the heat of the day, but we got them hanging out, and then we have them, God speaking both with the spiritual imagers who are about to go fulfill His will, and with His human imager.
That is very interesting.
Abraham,
okay.
Who's about, and they're at a high place near some trees. So anyway, I just think there's a lot of
yeah, there's a lot.
It's like garden imagery, kind of all wrapped up in here.
Okay, I have a question or observation, I guess. When he says, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing?"
Yeah.
Is that in direct reference to, hey, I'm going to send these two angels down to Sodom and Gomorrah to see? And because if that is, directly what he's talking about, then is this not a soft prompt or whatever, but Abraham's already been referenced a few times as he will be a blessing to the nations.
Right. Oh, that's good.
And we're coming up on judgment. So if he says, hey, if I withhold it from Abraham, then the opportunity to, because as we keep going, Abraham's going to attempt to intercede for the city.
That's right. He's going to fulfill his role.
Now, if God had chosen to, hey, I'll just send my guys down and we'll make an assessment on my own, then that doesn't facilitate a partnership or or an opportunity for Abraham to be a blessing. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's formation. We're back to this idea of formation again. This is an instance where God doesn't have to pause and say this. In the garden, God doesn't have to pause and say, "Where are you?" He knows where they are.
Right.
But so why does he do this? He pauses again and asks the question, should I keep this from Abraham? Anyway, and then he kind of answers it by just letting it sit there
And Abraham's like, what are you gonna do?
What are we talking about?
What?
Well, look, okay, so the commentary here says, this is interesting. Abraham is literally walking with God right now.
Okay.
Which is like the call of Genesis 17. I hadn't even thought of that. They're literally walking together outside under the stars here. Okay. Verse 17, this is what it says in regards to verse 17. Apart from the lack, let me get there. Here's a major theme. God's daring to adopt Abraham as his confidant, which throws into a bold relief a second theme, Abraham's daring to be Sodom's intercessor before Yahweh. I think those are two.
Those are worded very well.
Yeah. that's a great commentary series, the New International Commentary Series, but I love the way that's worded. In this narrative, both God and Abraham express mutual concerns. Can God trust Abraham? Can Abraham trust God? The answer to both questions is yes. And I like that. Obviously, God knows he can trust,
right?
Because he knows all things. But again, the demonstration of that being played out is important for Abraham's formation and for what's about. Well, we won't talk about Genesis 22 yet, but that is upcoming. That is upcoming. Now, this back and forth. I mean, we could read it, but essentially, there's a back and forth where, Abraham comes and says, will you really destroy this if there's righteous people? Are you really going to destroy innocent people or righteous people?
How does he say that? The innocent along with... where is it? Can we read it?
Yeah. Verse 23. Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? I don't know if that's...
that's what mine says,
close.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a great question, and it's one question that gets dealt with Job. It's another question. I'm trying to remember which prophet it is now, who's just angry at God. There's a couple of them. Which one is angry with God?
Jeremiah's not happy for a bit.
No, that's true. But there's a specific prophet whose whole book is all about. Anyway, someone in the comments can let us know. They'll be screaming it all the time and know which one it is. But it's one of the minor prophets who's dealing with just this question of God. Why is it this way? Why is it that the wicked seem to be blessed?
Yeah.
Why is it that the righteous seem to not be, or vice versa? Why is there seems to be no rhyme or reason? And it's kind of like what Abraham is asking or dealing with a similar question, which is, will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? I love that question because it does point right to Abraham's heart that he is this intercessor who, even in exile, even though he's not these people, he's not of Sodom, he's not of Gomorrah.
Yeah.
We're like 2 or 3 iterations removed from his native country. He's in Canaan, and it's now even a particular people group within a different people group. And he's interceding on their behalf. And of course, I think he knows that Lot's down there. So I wonder if that's a part of what he's trying to get after. Is what if Lot is down there doing right?
Yeah.
And his family is gathered together. Would you really, not for the sake of one? Because this is being on my brain. Because that's what happened in Egypt. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Egypt was judged. There were plagues already in Egypt because of Abraham's unrighteousness. But as soon as God shows up with Pharaoh, because of his righteousness,
right,
who does the right thing,
right,
actually turns over, or whatever. I don't. God relents from the plagues that he's visiting on Egypt. Yeah, I wonder if that's a part of what Abraham sees happening. Is a God who responds.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like that's giving Abraham an awful lot if he's like, well, let's see how God does with it. Maybe. I did kind of want to point out that, I do think that there is, when we're talking about, one of the minor prophets, whoever it is and all that stuff. I think there is a difference between, what we're talking about with sparing people from what is the very final judgment for these 2 cities versus if we were going to say, if we were talking Ecclesiastes or something like that, where it's what's it all worth in the end, or Proverbs that there's blessing and curse that falls on what's the one that the rain falls on the just and the unjust.
That's Job.
Yeah. Job. Okay.
That's Job.
Oh, so do you get what I'm saying within
Yes.
that wisdom literature where it's are these are we talking about isolated acts of conduct, or are we talking about a judgment on a city?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, well, and again, and I guess maybe we should keep reading the narrative because that's a part of the question that gets answered by the way that Sodom and Gomorrah acts, even when the two visitors show up, when the two angels show up.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a part of, and it's not simply that God's just saying, well, this is what we're going to do. It's that he says, we need to go search this thing out. It's like, I guess it's like the Genesis narrative again, which is that, where are you?
Mm-hmm.
Why have you done? What have you done? How do you know
Who
you're
told
naked?
you were naked? Yeah.
It's like God keeps giving an opportunity for repentance, for true confession and actual repentance.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's really what's going on here too. Is he's forming Abraham into Abraham's role to be blessed, to be a blessing, and a part of that is intercession. But then he's also still affording an opportunity, lowering the bar at all. I mean, God doesn't start with a number. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, that's
Abraham starts with a number.
Yeah,
you
and
know
then
what I
they
mean?
do a biblical haggle, and God is so easy on it. Like, yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, we'll go down 5 more or whatever it is. Is it by 5s? I think, or is it by 10s? 10?
I think it goes from 50 down to 10.
Yeah, ultimately that's where we're at. It goes down to 10. And so, but it's so interesting. What was it? When the Lord had finished speaking, verse 33, when the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left and Abraham returned home. Now, God doesn't go back into, or at least it's not told, the Lord doesn't go to Sodom and Gomorrah. So it's interesting, where does this figure go?
I always wonder if he's, if they are on that high place or whatever.
Yeah.
Is he able to see it from where he's at? Is he just...
Yeah, maybe so. Well, I think so because it's actually later on in chapter 19, before we get to the end, before we get to Lot and his daughters, which what a story. It says that early in verse 27, early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and saw dense smoke rising from the land. Foreshadow, if you haven't, read the story yet.
So you think from this place, this is where God
probably
makes his judgment?
Watched it, saw it. And actually there is a detail that I want to point out at some point when we get to the destruction narrative. But anyway, this is such a fascinating back and forth. And I think, maybe if we were to put this into a sermon context, I would say something like, you can see God's heart not only for Abraham, but also for others as a result of Abraham's heart for others. And it's not as though God doesn't have a heart for others, but it's like he's using Abraham or forming Abraham into a person who would be this kind of person, the person who would pray for, which I think actually shows up. I'm making all kinds of links right now as we're talking, which actually shows up later with Abimelech, because that's what God calls Abraham to do in order for Abimelech's family and children and women in his nation to be healed.
Yeah,
it's Abraham praying.
That's very interesting.
So I wonder if God's forming Abraham into one who really adopts that.
Okay, so he is becoming or being formed into one who will be a blessing to the nations. Not just in a lineage sense, but in an individual sense.
Yes.
Because, God gives him that, and then immediately he is super shady in Egypt.
That's exactly right.
So I don't know how else to say that, but
that's really interesting though, because after we get out of Genesis 19 here, and we get into 20 and 21, it's going to be something like that again.
Mm-hmm. Exactly like that again.
Exactly like that.
Oh no, sorry. Not in 21.
Or in chapter 20.
Yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah. There was something I was going to say.
I'm so sorry, keep interrupting.
No. I remember what it was. I think it's very interesting that God is God. He is who he is. He's not changing at all. But that he is operating with a set of prompts that allows Abraham to respond to become what he needs to be. I just think that's very interesting. That he could be super steadfast, but still choose to not just act in a way that could, rightly just say, like, I'm going to put my foot down every time, you will do this or you will do that. And does it in a way that creates opportunity for...
Yeah, it's like relational space.
Yeah.
It's like...
Yeah.
I know, I've used this example before, and we've talked about this before. It's like building Legos with your kid.
Yeah.
It's like if I build Legos with one of my kids, I know that one of my kids will want to destroy the tower we build. Maybe not now, they're getting older and they actually want to build them, but when they were younger, it was definitely like that. But that doesn't stop the relationship that forms as a result of us playing that thing together. And it seems, I like the way that you're phrasing that. It's like there's relational space where, because and it's not that Abraham is the one who initiates it. It's that God is the one who initiates this relational back and forth. Number one, he's the one who shows up in 18. At the end of 18, he's the one that says, should we let Abraham in on this? Wink, wink, nod, nod, put the finger on the nose. What do you guys think? And then Abraham picks that up and actually walks with God, which anyway, that seems to map on the whole Genesis, 1 and 2 ideal. But then there's all this space, like you said. How did you phrase it just now? You said that, like, there's this parameter, or there's like this...
He's creating prompts.
Prompts.
Yeah.
I like that. That's interesting.
I think we've talked about it before. It's kind of the inescapable question for everybody.
Yeah.
What is human free will and a sovereign God? What does that look like? Well, it looks like this.
It looks like this.
Like, it looks like God knowing what it is that he wants to accomplish, and then creating opportunities to respond within his will. And I don't think that takes away from God's sovereignty.
No, I agree.
We could run on that forever.
Because he still has an answer for what happens, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
God is still able to respond. Period. It's not as though it's not as though God is waiting on Abraham to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
He's already sent his agents, to the angels to Sodom and Gomorrah. They're on their way. The conversation now is between him and Abraham. And this is for Abraham's sake and for our sake to be formed, of course, as we read this, knowing that we can bring our concern. I wonder if this is what Hebrews has in mind, like when we're reading Hebrews and it says you can now come boldly to the throne, to the throne room of grace, and you can bring your petitions to him. You can speak with him and speak boldly. Because that's what Hebrews, we were having a discussion about Hebrews 6 this morning. That's what Hebrews 6 and on actually is talking about, is Abraham and this legacy of faith. And I wonder if there's some attachment there in Hebrews because of moments like this.
Well, I kind of wonder too if not just Abraham, but we see Moses will do it later or whatever. There's all kinds of other figures throughout the Old Testament who act as intercessor on behalf of the people until we get to Jesus. Yeah. Who is, the final fulfillment of all that stuff. And then after that final intercession has taken place, then come boldly before the throne.
That's right.
The intercessory relationship has been open and finished.
Yeah, it's not
the veil is torn.
That's good.
So Abraham is performing a function to the people that ultimately Christ does on our behalf, on behalf of the world. And then what does coming before the Lord look like? There is kind of a shift.
Yeah. It's not that he has to come to us in the same way that he had to in the Old Testament or in Christ. Mm-hmm. It's now he comes to us through the Spirit. Yeah. And now we have the Spirit living in us, as opposed to we need an encounter the way that Abraham had. I wonder if I'm making sense in that way. It's the Spirit resides in us, lives in us, whereas Abraham's waiting for God to show up again,
Yeah.
And it's such a difference now because of what Christ has done. We're getting way ahead. You're saying too much, man.
Sorry.
You're saying too much about, but it's good stuff.
We're in Genesis 19, and I said New Testament. Sorry.
No,
spoilers. It's about Jesus.
That's exactly right. Though, is that when Jesus comes to fulfill that final and then he becomes the intercessor. He intercedes for us. He calls us to do the same. And even the base prayer that Jesus gives is may your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is, I mean, it may not feel like an intercessory prayer.
Yeah.
But that is ultimately.
Well, and I totally get what you're saying, but then isn't it also in John? I gotta work on my memory, verse recall stuff. Something about, in various times and in various ways he's spoken to us through prophets.
I think we're in Hebrews again.
Yeah, are we? Okay.
I think we're in Hebrews 1, actually.
But now he speaks to us through his son.
Yes.
And it's like,
Yes.
well, that is what we're looking at right here.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. I think we've hit that chapter to death. That's I'm sure there's more to say still yet. But let's move on to Sodom and Gomorrah for time's sake. This whole chapter is really interesting, and maybe we could sum it up as opposed to doing so much reading, unless there's particular parts you want to read.
You know what? Hit a summary, and maybe I'll jump in on something.
Okay. So the angels come down. They're doing their task. Mm-hmm. They're coming to see what the Lord has said.
I'm going to stop you right.
Okay, let's go.
So, you know what? I'm just going to read the first verse of 19. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When he saw them, he rose and met them and bowed himself with his face towards the ground. And he said, "How now, my Lord?" I should have brought a different one than the New King James. "Here now, my lords, please turn to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go." And they said, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." The thing that I was wondering is, why is Lot there?
Yeah.
At the gate of the city and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And if in Abraham's mind, will you spare the city if there's 50, if there's 40, if there's 30, if there's 10? I think it's pretty easy for us to, conclude that he has Lot in mind.
So.
And if Lot is, supposedly the only person in this city who has any kind of desire to have right standing with God, is he at the gate of the city before nightfall? Why? For, the traveler, whoever's coming in, to be like, "Hey, we're just going to stay in the square." Like, "No, don't do that. Not here." I wonder if Lot has an ambition with being there. If his aim is hospitality.
That's a good question. I mean, he's called righteous Lot in the New Testament.
It's super speculative, but what's he doing there? And it seems like he's petitioning pretty hard for them to no, don't stay in the square. Come to my house.
It's kind of like not on this side of town.
Yeah. Once the sun goes down, not here.
Yeah, you don't want to be out. Something like that. I wonder if is maybe to use our phrasing or understanding. Yeah, you don't want to be on that side of town at night or whatever. I wonder if Lot knows that about his city. Now the question is, because on the flip side of what you just said,
that's where I was going to go next.
is he just looking to be like a high-ranking person?
Yeah.
And his character is such that he's wanting to. Well, we saw it already. He chose the better thing on purpose.
Yeah.
And we'll see it later on in the destruction narrative itself, where he's like, "Don't send me to the caves."
Yeah.
Don't send me to the mountains.
That's what I was going to say. Is even if speculatively, if his ambitions are honorable, if this is not a safe place when the sun goes down, get in the house. Immediately after, his conduct for how do we deal with this is real dark. But let's keep going.
That's true. That's a good point.
So I'm not trying to paint him in too nice of a light, but I'm wondering.
And that's again, I think we keep talking about Hebrews here because we're doing this long long span of the Bible, kind of storytelling. But Hebrews, I think, calls Lot righteous, and I've always wondered about that.
Maybe that's what I'm getting at. Is it because Lot is very aware of the city that he's living in?
I wonder so.
Well,
and surely he's heard the stories of, he didn't go with Abram when it was Abram, for no reason. I think he trusts at least in Abram, and Lot's kind of hanging out with him for a little while when Abram's still building altars and all that kind of stuff. So I wonder if he's got some encounter with God through Abram, or maybe he's seen or he's heard the stories, or I don't know.
Well, and he has a direct experience with Abraham coming to pull him out of wherever.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
We should have done one of these for Melchizedek and all that stuff.
Yeah, and for the kings.
So, Lot has a, I guess, allegiance to Abraham. Maybe because he can obviously see God's promise and favor for Abraham, but then also, Abraham has taken care of Lot in a pretty heavy way by this point in the story. But
you were going to say he's taking care of Lot a lot.
Yeah, I was. I didn't want to do it.
You said it. Okay, so they want to spend the night. He says no. He brings them in. provides them hospitality, but it turns out that probably is like there's an ulterior motive for doing that, because then some men come to the house. It says all the men, in fact.
The young and the old.
Yes. Mine
All
has
of
it.
them.
Mine has it before they had gone to bed. All the men from every part of the city. Yeah, both young and old. Mine says exactly that. They surround the house. They call it to Lot.
From every quarter. Like it's a very, it's everybody.
Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. What a strange,
it's bold.
What a strange thing for like these men to for that to be their thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this is how we initiate someone, or this is how we prove our power, or I don't know what. But it's a very odd, very dark thing that's happening here.
Yeah, and I think the list of questions of like, well, what leads the town to, is everybody locking their doors every night? Don't be out on this, like, what's the scenario? Or is this hey, there's, a foreigner in town? Is this a, I don't know, an initiation or dominance claim? The list of questions, none of them are comfortable.
No.
And there's no coming to a position where we can,
Yeah.
And it's not fun to speculate.
No, and here again we get another example that the Bible is not, it's an adult book, it's a realistic book. I mean, it's not a gross book. I don't mean it that way, but it's not hiding from the dark things that people do.
Yeah.
And this is clearly one. That is very much not good. And you know what? It's really interesting. This kind of maps onto this sounds like Lamech. This sounds like,
it does.
you know,
or Babel.
Or Babel.
That they were exceedingly violent.
Yes. Which, you would imagine that's what they're after. Mm-hmm. That's a part of their aim. Okay, so then Lot goes outside and says, let's not do that, guys. But then he says he calls it a wicked thing. But then he offers another wicked option in replacement for this other option that they're providing. And he says, look, in verse 8, look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof. And I don't know how that strikes you, but it reminds me of what we've seen so far with Hagar. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of what we've seen Abram say to Sarai in Egypt. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of how Adam throws Eve under the bus with God.
Yes.
It seems like so far, the rebellious beings who come down and take wives for themselves, mm-hmm. It seems like women's bodies keep getting used to prop up men's comfort or preferences or whatever. Yeah,
this is definitely a spot where I was like, hey, this is very uncomfortable and deserves time and conversation. But because you could keep reading and get through it pretty quick and be like, well, how about this rather than that? Yeah. And then how is the reader supposed to respond to that? I think the correct answer is like disgust and outrage.
Yeah, with revulsion.
And and we ought to be. I think a poor way to read it would be, and you hear people say all kinds of weird things like, well, they're both bad options, but this one rather than that one seems to be Lot's conclusion, which I think is the wrong conclusion.
Which is obviously still the wrong conclusion.
And I think you're exactly right that this is another instance of where, someone within God's narrative plan is choosing a route of self-preservation at the expense of the sexual abuse of another person, which is always wrong. Always wrong.
I agree. I agree. And isn't it interesting that it's some kind of pleasure, something. It's food and it's sexual desire. Those seem to be the two, or I guess you could throw power in there or something like that.
I wonder also, food, pleasure, power, whatever. But when we're looking at Abraham and when they make their way down to Egypt, tell them you're my sister. Right. I think this is a self-preservation thing. He says they will kill me and take you.
Right.
He gets a great deal out of that.
He sure does.
Everybody's giving him stuff. It's terrible.
Yes.
We're laughing, but like he did it wrong.
Yes. I guess what I'm trying to point out is like these seem to be the same parts of the playbook over and over again. Though.
Yeah.
Like this is the enemy's playbook over and over again.
And that's what I'm saying about, it is always wrong.
Yes.
Abraham was wrong when he did it a couple times with his wife. Lot is certainly wrong here when he offers his daughters.
Yes.
And the story continues. When I say it's wrong every time
Yeah.
to use someone else's body for your self-preservation or the ends to your own means, we still have to finish chapter 19. It's going to happen again.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, so the angels pull Lot back in. They strike the people with blindness, and all the men are groping around. It says they could not find the door. I don't think that they cared to find the door anymore.
Yeah.
If I'm just commenting about this.
Suddenly blind.
If you're suddenly blind for.
Well, I don't know. Maybe if you're gonna say how what's the level of depravity of this town? How violent? How how deep is that hunger?
Maybe so. Ugh. Gross all around. Either way, gross. Okay, so then the angels say to Lot, okay, do you have any other family that would be coming in? So we got sons-in-laws here. Okay, Lot goes and warns them. They think he's joking, is what the scriptures say. So they don't believe him.
Which feels wild.
Yeah, why is it? Why would Lot joke about this? Like, why is that a thing to laugh about?
Yeah.
It's such an interesting maybe insight again into the character and nature of these cities.
Well, and this is kind of another spot to say, what are the words used actually mean? We're in verse 4 says, now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all people from every quarter. Where are these sons-in-laws of Lot? I mean, it seems like the language that's used is like, hey, all the men in the city are gathered around. I guess that's my question is, are they there?
It seems not. It seems not, because Lot has to leave. Because Lot goes out in the city to go. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were pledged to marry his daughters. Now, it could be that they're a part of this gaggle of guys that are now blind and groping around, and he's speaking to them like, come on with us. But why would they then not immediately recognize? Why wouldn't Lot put it as a part of his conversation with them? You guys just got struck blind. Like,
okay, that's fair.
You know what I mean? Like, these dudes are serious. Let's get out of here, or something like that. I don't know. I feel like that kind of language at the beginning, I think it's an indicator that the city, by and large, maybe it wasn't literally every man showed up.
Okay, yeah, that's the.
But it's like, this is common. This is how we do things around here.
Right.
It doesn't mean that everybody does that, but it means that's
it gives you a pulse on the men of the city. Okay, I'm tracking with you.
And so okay, but they think he's joking, which is such a I don't know. I would wonder, doesn't Lot's demeanor mean something to you? Doesn't him showing up and he's breathless and all this crazy stuff has happened to him already this evening? Doesn't his urgency imply something? And I wonder, is it because he's a foreigner in the city that they don't think to take him seriously, or maybe because he is kind of an upstart who likes to sit at the town circle. I don't know the story is all I'm trying to say. I just think it's a really interesting response to what Lot has to say. They think he's joking. Okay, so he's like, okay. So I think them staying probably is probably trying to, or it's creating a situation in which the daughters want to stay. I don't think the wife wants to leave, is what we're told. And even Lot hesitates. Verse 16, when he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, flee for your lives. Don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, no, my lords, please. Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? than my, like, why does he keep saying that? It's small. Look, it's so small.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's some bargaining going on here that's very different than Abraham's bargaining. You know what I mean? Abraham's bargaining is, what if there's like even a couple righteous people? You know, Lot's like, look, this city isn't as bad. It's a little city, so it won't be as bad as this one over. Or I don't know. It's just this is very odd. We're getting insight into, I think, like Lot's character, which is obviously better than these guys in the city. And again, the New Testament calls him righteous Lot. So there is something to him that has to have that. But still, like, we're seeing how compromised he is.
Yeah.
As a result of being at Sodom and Gomorrah.
I wonder if that is another opportunity for, like, the language that's being used being, again, like other Genesis language callbacks. You know, when we see cities start cropping up,
right,
then it's not, it's usually accompanied with heavy violence, you know? And if maybe that's part of the point of the way Lot's talking, is like, look at Sodom and Gomorrah, these big, this place is so depraved. Right. This is just a little city. How bad could it be, I wonder.
And I wonder if there's like a modern day parallel. It's like, don't live in the city, you got to move to the suburbs because that's the safe place or the better place. Or so, I don't know. I wonder if there's some kind of anyway, I don't know if I were to throw that in a sermon, if that would work or not, or how I would necessarily get to that point. But it seems like that's what Lot's trying to get after is like, well, that's the bad stuff that we're leaving. And don't send me out to the wilderness. Don't send me out into nature. Don't send me to these mountains because there's no way we could make a living there. Send me to that little tiny, I don't know, just the bargaining up from nothing, whereas Abraham's bargaining down, hopefully. You know what I mean? Like Lot's trying to bargain his way up in the world.
That's interesting,
and Abraham's trying to bargain the Lord's justice down. I don't know, it's just such an interesting...
Well, okay, to continue that contrast, Abraham's petition is external. It's for them. Right. Lot's is...
for me.
Yeah. Don't make me go over there.
Let me think, look at this small town.
Maybe he's just like a super soft city boy, and he's like, I can do it. Don't make me go out there. It's dirty.
Okay, so let's keep going on. Okay, then he said to him, very well, I will grant this request too. Verse 21, I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it. Now, that's interesting, that God will be gracious to the small city just because Lot is there. Like Lot was in Sodom and Gomorrah, he wouldn't be gracious to that city. So I don't know, there's just interesting that God seems to know, or the angels or whoever, as they've been, paying attention to what's going on. Like this little city called Zor gets spared as a result of Lot's presence in it. So in a way, it's like even God can turn Lot's, bargaining for himself into a net benefit for someone else. I find that fascinating over and over in the story, how God turns a thing, which is kind of the final statement in Genesis 50, but that God keeps turning these things towards his aims and his will, and obviously his will is that Lot would not be destroyed here. But okay, by the time Lot reached Zor, that's verse 23, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Okay, we have two instances here, which is interesting. This is what I was talking about earlier, mentioning verse 24. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Okay, so it's just it's an interesting way to describe that. The Lord from the Lord. Does that make sense? The Lord decided from the Lord. I think this is another instance in which there's a dual, at least, obviously I'm a Trinitarian, you're a Trinitarian, I believe in the Trinity. But again, there's at least two powers going on here, even in these early statements in the Old Testament. So that's all I wanted to point out there. I found that interesting. Okay, so we've got this destruction happening from the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. okay, before we get to the pillar of salt deal, I want to point out that, because like this is what I had thought to do in the sermon initially, but ran out of time. And what time are we even at right now? Oh my goodness, too long right now. Yeah, I had thought to include this as a part of the explanation. I don't think that every natural disaster that occurs is God is the same thing as this. God is the one hurling, it's the Lord deciding, and it's from the Lord in heaven that the burning sulfur or whatever rains down. I don't think that every natural disaster is automatically divine justice. I think that the world is raw. God calls us to rule over it, subdue it, bringing order from chaos. I think the world is full of potential, but part of potentiality is the opportunity for chaos or for pain or for toil or something like that. As much as I have opportunity within some place here on the island, like if I were to buy a plot of land, I would still have to go clear the trees. I would have to dig up the roots. There would be work to do, and there's potential within that work for harm. And so I'd have to bring order to that. So it doesn't mean we were going to have to pull garden or weeds in the garden. So I think we have to be careful to then extrapolate from this and go, okay, well, every natural disaster we see today is a divine judgment upon our nation or something like that, or upon another nation or whatever. I don't think we know.
I think people need to tread very carefully if they're going to ascribe God's motivation behind natural events. And even if you're even if you do talk about subdue the earth, order out of chaos, all that stuff, like you are more than capable to clear a plot, build a garden, all that stuff. The ocean's going to do what the ocean's going to do.
Period.
You go tame it,
Yeah, good luck.
Go you tame the earthquake and the hurricane, all that stuff. Like, it's a humbling thing, it kind of, it's a reminder of, the world that we live in.
That's right.
It is, how much of it is subduable.
Yeah, well, okay.
And what does that mean?
That's a good counter question. I really like that you've asked it that way, because here's maybe my not an argument back and forth, but just maybe an interesting thought. Okay, well, what about houses that have like flexible steel that can endure? You know what I'm saying? An earthquake, or homes down in Florida that are built with concrete as opposed to maybe a regular stick and brick. So they can withstand a hurricane or something like that. That to me is, I think, what it might mean for humanity to subdue the earth in that sense. Not that I can tell the ocean to stop, but I can provide safety and harbor and flourishing through the chaos that's going to occur anyway. It's not as though the wild animals aren't still out there,
right?
You know what I mean? But now, do I have the means to protect myself in a way that would honor them and me? You know what I mean? I guess that's maybe another nuance. Maybe that's what I'm trying to look for.
Okay,
That's the word I'm looking for. Is a nuance to that idea. I can't tame a hurricane. But maybe I can
endure.
Well, maybe I can do that, and then maybe I can advise someone else how to do that. And then maybe we can make the building materials cheap enough such that other people can do that. And then maybe what we do is we build city blocks that accommodate this, and maybe we build up the city so that we're not sitting below the floodplain, so that when a hurricane hits, my house will automatically be flooded. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, there's two categories, I guess. I would put it in order out of chaos, or how do you live within the chaos?
Yes, which is our theme of Exile, honestly. And so how do you do good? You know what I mean? How do you? And it's not just in an individualistic standpoint, although that's true too. I think the Bible's about that as well. But I also wonder if that's a part of what the Bible cares about as well, is how we arrange people in spaces in a just and equitable way to where when a natural disaster hits, there isn't obvious disparity as a result of you're zoned over here, you're zoned over there, you're black. Now, some of that is people's decisions. They want to live in the floodplain. They sign they sign the contract.
Yeah.
But are we okay with that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess this is a longer discussion.
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
That's not really a part of
Yeah, we're at
Genesis.
an hour and 5.
But I think that that's a part of what's going on here, or not part of what's going on here, but what's something I wanted to pull out, which is that we are told here, God is a reigning
which
God of
doesn't
justice.
give us license to say like, well, God did it here, so now I'm going to point at everything and say that. Yeah, I agree completely.
Okay, so they escape, although she does not. Okay, the wife turns into a pillar of salt. Do you have any insight on that?
No, not
I don't
particularly. I think I think it just kind of tells you what it tells you is that they were reluctant to leave. I mean, I don't know, why is she looking?
Yeah, and I think people who want to make a bigger thing of this than it is, and you go there today and there's pillars of salt. Yeah. Okay, fair, fine. I'm not going to snipe, but I think it's just a description of what's going on.
Because you made me nervous. We're like, you have any insight on that? Like, what am I missing? Because I don't.
I kind of feel the same way. I just feel like we're told that she receives judgment.
Yeah, and if any, I mean, at the very least that you can pull from it is, that she has some sort of longing or allegiance to the city that she doesn't want to leave or see destroyed.
There's a reason.
I think is all you can really take from that.
Yeah.
If there are pillars that stand to this day. Cool.
I
don't know what to do past that.
I don't know what to do with that either, but let's not speculate too hard on a thing we can't know.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is interesting, verse 29. So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. So it turns out that Lot is like receiving the blessing, the benefit of Abraham's relationship with God. Less so than Lot's own righteousness seems to carry the day or something like that.
Which is that intercessor
That's right.
that we were talking about before.
Okay, this is a horrible story. Let me just sum this up. Lot is up there in Zor, or they left Zor, and they actually end up settling in the mountains.
In the mountains, yeah.
Which is such an interesting
But it doesn't say why.
Well, it says he was afraid to stay in Zor, but we don't know why he's afraid to stay in Zor. Is it because we've got a similar situation to what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah? Is it that they know he ran from Sodom and Gomorrah? I mean, certainly, these random people that just showed up on the day.
Judgment was coming here. Don't bring that with you here. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, maybe it's like,
not here.
It's like that kind of thing. So he's afraid to stay in there. And I don't think he's afraid because it's just a bunch of women hanging out in the city. Now, there's gonna be a reason I'm saying it this way. He's not afraid because there's a bunch of women hanging out in the city. Clearly there must be men down in the city. Someone is threatening to him, okay? And it's probably the women and the men who are threatening to him, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, in a patriarchal culture, I don't think, okay. Verse 31. One day the older daughter said to the younger, our father's old. Okay, so then they contrive this plan to get their father drunk so that they can sleep with him so that they can carry on their family line. But what she says is that there's no man around here to give us children. I find that interesting.
Yeah, and I have like questions about that. I don't have an answer, but like, is this some sort of, they were both engaged in the city or whatever. Is there some sort of like law or license to like, hey, we're gonna mix with these groups but not these ones? Are they now in a city where they're like, hey, no, we, maybe there are men in the city but they don't intermarry with that group? What's going on?
Yeah, and I think this is the point. It's like they're making this claim, although they're not willing to go anywhere to do anything about that. They're reaching out and taking of their own, their own solution in the same way that Abraham and Sarah did with Hagar, the same way that Adam and Eve did, the same way that Lamech has done. Like clearly there's some distortion going on here.
I wonder, I guess this is another question, is, if they marry into another family or whatever in a patriarchal society and all that stuff, then wouldn't they then be under, the banner or household name of whoever it is they marry into?
Yes.
Is this an ambition to hang on to Lot's line?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think all of that's intermixed in there. I think all of that's a part, but that's not quite. It's not quite the same though, because we get instances of Abraham's family later on, where there are women who are their inheritors, whom God upholds.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's women all throughout the later on text, and I get that that's different. We got a later on text going on there, but still, I wonder if they had done righteously, what God would have provided for them.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I understand what you're saying. You're trying to explain the motivation here. I just think it's so fascinating, and I think all that's a part of it. I just think it's so fascinating. They say there are no men around here, and so then they get their father drunk. Where'd they get the wine from? Because it doesn't say that they're. So, like, did they go to the grocery store in Zor?
Yeah, I don't know. What kind of rations are they taking out to the mountains?
After they fled their, did they go, like, this is my question. Did they pass men in the city of Zor, going to the grocery store in Zor, and they're just using this as an excuse to, you know what I mean? To whatever wicked element of the things that you brought up.
I think it's a similar situation as earlier when we were talking about, what are the motivations of the men of the city gathering around? Right. Whatever the list of conclusions we come to, none of them are comfortable.
None of them are good. That's right.
And so, and just to be clear, I wasn't trying to reason into, the daughters want to try to preserve a family line or whatever. No. That is still not good enough.
No, absolutely. No. I'm agreeing with you. And so I wonder, like, across whatever their reasonings are, like, it's clearly distorted. Because I just have it in my mind, and I could be completely wrong. They went to the grocery store in Zor. They passed by men that they could have been married to, but instead of doing that, they picked up wine to go back and do this thing.
Lot says, like, well, let me go to this small city or whatever, and then they have to leave there for some reason that we're not told. Maybe their read on it is, hey, we've been in 2-3 cities now. Yeah. This is not the place to be. Right. There is no one. If
it could be.
Maybe they've made their assessment of the world, and they're like, that place
it ain't out there.
That's it.
Yeah, it ain't out there. Which is still, like
it's
you
still
said,
not enough. Still not a good reason.
Still, it's not good. Okay, so they do this thing. They get their father drunk, so much so that he is unaware of what's going on to him. And like you pointed out earlier, just in the same way that Lot was going to use them, now they are doing the opposite. But it doesn't cover up what Lot was going to do.
Yeah, no, like.
Oh, I wonder if that's what's going on here. You wonder if they're trying to shame their father. I don't know. It's just another little nuance, another little element. I wonder if they're trying to shame him as judgment for what he tried to do to them while they were in the city in Sodom and Gomorrah. Anyway, whatever's happening, not good. They're abusing him now.
Yeah, I think all categories for them and Lot completely wrong. But to tag on to what I said earlier, I think it is always wrong. Yes. To use someone else's body for your same ambition, as we've seen all the way through, That's right. Which is an interesting point that it's not, so far up in the story, all the violence has been enacted by men. Right. Like this isn't exclusive. People can use people for their own ends, and it is wrong every time.
And we're going to see more of that as Genesis goes on, unfortunately, and it really it amplifies. You know what I mean? We get more and more stories throughout the rest of the story as we get into Joshua and Judges. I mean, there's just some really hard stuff in here. Some really difficult stuff to read. It's not good. So what happens is they are kind of celebrating with one another, like, I did this thing, younger sister, you go do this thing, and what ends up happening is they both have children from their father. So, like, let's be clear, this is an incestuous relationship that is not good. And I don't think that the Bible, just because it's in here, like we said about slavery, just because it's in here doesn't mean it's condoned. It doesn't mean that the Bible is saying this is okay. Yeah. And in fact, the offspring, who are the Moabites and the Ammonites, are enemies of Israel later on, or at least there is some tension and frustration. I believe, if I'm right, I believe it's the Moabites who hire Balaam to curse the nation of Israel on their way into the Promised Land. So, like, there's some we might be relatives in some way, but there's there's tension here,
Right.
And it's their history is mired, in kind of a difficult beginning, and then later on we see some more conversation back and forth between these nations and the nation of Israel. Yeah, not two chapters that are super exciting to talk about.
Yeah, it's
honestly.
not a feel good conversation. That's for sure.
Yeah, and so here it is again. We could probably say pretty simply, Exile is not going well still. And now I do, maybe a couple more recap ideas. God's eyes are on more than just the chosen. God works with Lot, preserves his life as a result of the intercession of the chosen. But it's not like the chosen are the only ones that God can see and the only ones God will deal with. Likewise, when injustice happens around us, God's got his eye on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he's sending out his agents, his imagers throughout the world to see what's going on. Now, just because we said earlier that we can't say all natural disaster or every bad thing that ever happened to you, it's either the devil or it's God.
Right, yeah.
And likewise, we don't know what is the devil and what is God. And so, I think there are instances in life in which we might go through a thing and it might have some spiritual derivation. Now, I don't want to speculate, it's this percentage, it's that percentage, it's this event versus that event. I can't know that. That's far above my pay grade. I guess what I'm pointing out is that it does happen. And because it does happen means it could happen again, which means that, when bad things happen or when good things happen, I think the whole point is that we're supposed to be like Abraham, who walks with God, who builds the altar and calls upon his name. Yeah. I think that's the response, regardless, whether it's good or bad. And instead of me trying to figure that all the time and trying to assign percentages to, okay, well, it was me this much, it was my society this much. How about this? It was the world this much, it was my flesh this much, and it was the devil this much. Yeah. I don't know that we should play that game.
Yeah, it could be any three of the options, but there's only one remedy and response.
That's right. That's right. It's to call on the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
To walk with God as we saw in Genesis 17, and even before in Genesis 15 and 12. But anyway, man, I appreciated this conversation. Yeah. You got anything else you want to throw out there?
No, I enjoyed this a lot.
This was fun. We talked for way too long already.
What were you aiming for?
Like an hour, maybe.
Well,
yeah,
hour 17?
I don't know that we could ever do it quickly again. We'll see. Hey, if you guys like this, then we'll continue to do something like this or in this format. If there's stuff that we just feel is kind of important to cover in the future, I don't know. Maybe you like to do it enough that you'll just make me sit up here and do it.
Yeah, I'm gonna bug you about it every time.
But anyway, small groups feel free to utilize this material. Feel free to let us know how something like this impacts you guys, and if this is something that you would like to see more of, we will definitely accommodate that request. If we've got like 2 views and it's me and Devin, then cool, we'll leave it at that, and we'll know that this exists for.
We'll talk like this without the camera,
which we do anyways. Yeah. Which we do anyways. Well, with that said, we hope you guys really enjoy Sunday service coming up, and hope that this was an asset.